Thank you guys so much for visiting us at Vision Church Online. We have a whole team of people just waiting to pray for you. If you have a need for prayer, just click the I Need Prayer button. If you want to partner with Vision Church financially, you can just click the Giving button. If you haven't downloaded YouVersion yet, you got to download it. You get the whole Bible. In addition to that, you can follow along with today's teaching with our teaching notes, and you can see the announcements for this week. If you're planning on visiting Tucson anytime soon, I just want to personally invite you to Vision Church. So thanks again for being with us online. We hope you enjoy your experience, and we hope to see you in person real soon.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate Graham being here to bring you this teaching. Let's welcome Graham here to the stage.
All right. Well, thanks, Dad. That was a great teaching. I guess I'll just go ahead and pray, and we can wrap things up here this morning. Now, you guys should have seen me last night. I was really taken aback. Leanna says, okay, or Brent says, there's an intro video. Your dad's going to introduce you, and then you're going to go up and teach. Okay. So I go sit over there. Pins and needles, nervous energy. I haven't taught this yet. Okay, go. No, wait, sit back down. Okay, go. No, still not time to. Really? Okay, now it's my turn. All right, so I'm here. We're here. Don't tell him I said that, because I'm going to get in trouble. He's not going to let me do this again. If you tell him, he won't know otherwise. He's not here. He's away. My understanding is he's at a women's retreat. I know he didn't mention that in the video. Can't imagine why. Don't tell him I said that either. Please don't do that. I don't want to get in trouble here. Trying to get things set up to get it started, but I'm excited to be here with you guys today. I always look forward to the chance to get up here and teach, and in all seriousness, thanks to Dad for letting me do that, for you guys to being willing to be here and be a part of that. I think we'll have a good time today. Always happy to get a chance to get up on stage with you guys. I do feel like Dad's kind of messing with me. I think he likes to give me a hard time because this is the second time in a row he's asked me to teach during the weekend a new Marvel movie premiered. If you know me, that's a serious sacrifice. I was going to try and sneak out and see it last night, but it didn't work out, and so I'm still, if anybody drops a Black Panther spoiler from the crowd, I will come off this stage. I'll repent afterwards, but I will. I'll do it. Don't do it. We'll be just fine. Nice. There we go. It's a good start. I'm leading off after Andy Stanley here, like Dad said, 5 weeks, which is intimidating. Andy Stanley's my favorite. Don't tell Dad I said that either. But it was a great series. I loved it. Had a great time. This brand new series and this deconstruction of the temple model, getting rid of the sacred men and the sacred places and the scared followers, and getting on just a really an even keel, a one-on-one relationship with God is a message I think we can all take back. That's my new favorite picture of Andy, by the way. It says, "You're scaring the children." I have no idea why or what the context of that is, but every time I need a picture of Andy from now on, that's my go-to. He boiled the whole New Testament down to one sentence, 6 words. What does love require of you? And that really, that's amazing. Except now I have to teach, and he already boiled the whole New Testament down to one sentence. So what do you do? How do you follow that up? What do you do after that? So I thought maybe I'd just come in and talk about my favorite atheist today. And you're not supposed to. That's not how you're pastoring. You're doing it wrong. But the joke's on you because I'm not a pastor. So it works out. I can do that. I can talk about Sam Harris. He's my favorite atheist. I think he's Andy Stanley's favorite atheist too. Actually, Andy mentioned him a couple times in the Who Needs God series. I got the sense that Andy's pretty familiar with his work, which made me feel better because for a while I thought as an aspiring amateur pastor, I probably shouldn't have a favorite atheist. But if Andy Stanley does too, then maybe it's okay. Maybe it's not so bad. But I thought we could actually learn some good stuff from this today, and here's kind of the why behind that is we live in a world, 2018 America, and we probably all have people. Most of us, if we're here, sitting here in church on a Sunday morning, we got up early, we combed our hair. Most of us, I'm just kidding. No, I don't see anybody. We came into to church, and most of us probably are trying to follow God with our lives. Maybe some of us aren't yet. We're not quite there yet, and thank you for coming anyway. Welcome. So glad you're here. But most of us are in that place. Most of us also have people in our lives who aren't. and who we would like to be, kids or coworkers or classmates, or that's all the alliteration I can come up with. But you guys got it. Thank you. I appreciate that. When you use a bunch of words that start with the same letter in a row, that's alliterate. Colleagues, classmate, never mind. We got people that we're trying to get on board here. We're trying to bring them to church. We're trying to get them into a relationship with God. We're not trying to push it too hard, We're trying to kind of be cool about it, but we'd really like it if they were here, and they're not yet. And where we are right now, 2018, United States, our major competition for the hearts and the minds and the souls of these people is not usually other religions. That comes up occasionally, but in most cases, not really. Somebody starts to take an interest in God here, your neighbor, whatever, gets interested in God. They probably don't go tour the local mosque and go to Pennsylvania Dutch country to study the ways of the Amish and, get roped into a free lunch at Scientology like my buddy Jared did one time. Most people, that doesn't happen. Chances are if they get interested in God, what are they going to do? They're going to wander into church, because Christianity is still kind of the default setting in the United States. That's just kind of the world that we live in. So our competition for these folks is, I'm in marketing. You can hear me talking as though we're going to sell them something, but it's not really other religions. It's, these days, increasingly, all the time, it's the absence of a religion, of a faith, of a belief in God at all. What we'll, call the new atheism for purposes of this teaching. And this is just kind of the idea that, I don't really have to think about it too much, don't have to worry about it too much. There isn't really anything out there. Anyway, and it's a growing trend. Didn't used to work this way. There was a time back in the day, right, where you couldn't really come out as an atheist. If you were, you had to pretend you weren't. You could be the worst guy in town, but you still had to go sit in the church pew on Sunday morning. Otherwise, nobody would come to your auto dealership or whatever it was. And we're not there anymore. Atheism isn't taboo the way that it used to be. It kind of has a cachet to it now, almost, in certain circles. And we might not get that much exposure to that. We can kind of get into a Christian bubble a little bit with the books we read and the music that we listen to and the shows we watch, and, kind of miss some of the stuff that's going on there if we're not careful. But if you're kind of on the other side, if you're on the cable news shows or academia or, New York Times editorial page, YouTube, certainly the podcast sphere, where I still spend an inordinate amount of time, I'm working on it. But you come across this stuff, the new atheists, and there's a bunch of them, and they're slick, and they're polished, and they're smart, they're funny, they're friendly, some of them. Richard Dawkins is still a jerk, but he's funny though. And there's a bunch of these guys out there, and they're kind of it's almost a cottage industry at this point. They're kind of making a living. They kind of have a shtick. They may be very sincere, but also there is almost a business to it. And I think this is what we're going to contend with when we are trying to bring somebody into the fold here. We're trying to explain to somebody a little bit about God, a little bit about Jesus, a little bit about Christianity. What we're more likely to come up against than another religion is this idea of the new atheism. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit today, and specifically about Sam Harris, because he's the one that I'm most familiar with. We'll go with a little bit of his stuff today. He's very prolific. He's been at this a long time. He's made a good living. He looks a little more sinister in this picture actually than I met him to, which maybe works to my advantage. But he actually seems like a really nice guy. Business is good. The atheism business. He's got the Waking Up podcast. He gets 2 million downloads every time he drops an episode of this podcast. Granted, one of them is me, so 1,999,999 count, but still, that's a lot of downloads. He's written 5 New York Times best-selling books on the topic of atheism, has a net worth estimated in the millions at this point, goes on speaking tours, talks to Joe Rogan, goes on Bill Maher's show, and Batman called him a racist on TV one time, which was actually unfair, but it was kind of funny. Batman gets really mad at you on TV. It's worth noticing, maybe just for me. I don't know. I thought it was funny. But so Sam's been at this a while, and he has some interesting things to say. I actually, I listened to his show, not for the atheism, but he has a lot of interesting views on other things, other topics, artificial intelligence, and self-defense, and violence, and guns, and North Korea, and he's a smart guy. He's got a lot of cool stuff to say, but also big into the atheism scene. And so I've heard a lot of what he has to say, and I thought maybe I could bring some of that in here today, share that with you guys. And I have this bad habit of trying to do like 3-hour seminars and 40-minute teachings. So I'm only going to be able to just barely touch on these arguments and the kind of things that he brings up. There's whole books you can read about this stuff if you want to. I would encourage you to. It's interesting, I think. But the point today is kind of going to be listen to the questions, listen to my thoughts maybe on it, and then think, okay, what would I do? What would I say? What would my response be if I was trying to talk to somebody I cared about this stuff, and they had been exposed to some of these arguments? Would I even know where to start? Would I know where to begin? Would I know where to go? Would I know where to look? How would I handle this? And we can kind of learn a little bit about ourselves in the process. So the first objection or talking point that Sam likes to bring up is, if God existed, we'd know, meaning we would, like capital K-N-O-W, know. It would be extremely obvious if God wanted it to be. If God was all powerful, if God was in existence, if God cared about us knowing he was there, we would know he was there. And got a quote here. Sam tends to speak in long, eloquent paragraphs, which is probably another reason that I think he and I would get along. But he says, it would be trivially easy, in fact, for an omniscient being to write or inspire a book that would remove all doubt about him. Neither the Bible nor the Quran is that sort of book. For instance, if the Old Testament contained a single chapter that resolved the deepest questions of 21st century science, I too would be a believer. He goes on. Many people push back against this. I think they're not thinking clearly enough about just how good a book could be written by an omniscient being, and just what sort of signs could be in there that would demonstrate that it could not possibly have been of human origin. Every rational atheist could be convinced about the reality of God or the truth of Christianity or any specific religion given sufficient evidence. If Jesus shows up on the White House lawn and starts wielding his magical powers, and David Copperfield and all the other magicians can't figure out how he's doing it, and he's healing the sick and reading minds and flying without the aid of technology and just doing the whole superhero dance for us, every scientist would be convinced that something supernatural, or at least totally unique in human history, was going on. There is a sufficient demonstration that could make believers out of all of us skeptics. That's from the Waking Up Podcast, episode 19, Sam Harris. It's a little snarky, it's a little disrespectful, but it raises an interesting question, right? Okay, God exists, God's all-powerful, let's assume that. God wants us to know he exists. Why don't we just know? Why isn't it really obvious? Why don't we have obvious signs and wonders and miracles that take place after the invention of the camera phone, so that all of this can be captured and there can be no doubt in anyone's mind that, yes, this is true? I think there's some pretty good evidence to believe in the God of the Bible. If you look into the life of Jesus and what happened after he lived and died and the fulfilled prophecy that's in the Old Testament, that's there. But Sam says, well, it should be much bigger. And I will concede, what he's asking for, we don't have, okay? We don't have that. So why not? Two possibilities, I guess. The first being that Sam is right and there is no God. Obviously, that's not the conclusion I've come to this morning. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I would go join. Well, I said Sam's Club last night, and we laughed, and we realized that wasn't what we couldn't call it that. That's already taken. We'd have to call it something else. But I would go join Sam and be one of his atheist disciples, I guess. But I didn't come to that conclusion this morning. The second conclusion is there is a God, but his plan or his aim or his goal is not to make himself so blindingly obvious that his existence is undeniable. That also seems like a possibility. In other words, there could be a God who doesn't behave the way Sam Harris thinks that a God would behave if there was a God, or that Sam Harris would behave if he was God. Because that's really what he's saying, right? Oh, there must not be a God because if I was God, I would do this, and nobody does this, so there must not be a God. There's another possibility there, which is that he doesn't understand the way that God would operate, just like, really for any of us with our 3-pound human brains trying to comprehend the way that an almighty God would operate, we're going to struggle with that. In fact, if we look at the Bible, and I'm not doing this to prove that God is true. You can't prove God is true by citing the Bible. That's kind of cheating. It says in the Bible that God is true. Don't do that, okay? But if you look at what the Bible says about God, it's consistent with the sort of God that wouldn't do what Sam is asking for. God's big on free will. God's big on us having a choice, getting to decide whether we're going to follow him, whether we're going to obey him or reject him. That's all throughout the Bible. He created people that way. He gave them that option. We don't tend to do very well with it, but it's there. This is important to him. If it wasn't, he could have made us that way, and we'd just be robots, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. That's fine. So apparently free will is part of the issue. This matters to God. God's thoughts work differently. So if God creates just obvious, definitive, everyday, smack you in the face with it, proof that he's there, do you really still have free will at that point? That's kind of my thought on it. The bottom line, though, is that God's thought processes are going to be a little bit different than ours, and we can't assume he doesn't exist just because he doesn't do what we would think he would do if we were God. So Isaiah 55, if you believe in the Bible and you believe that Isaiah, spoke to God the way he said that he did, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So yeah, God not behaving the way we think he should is not evidence that there isn't a God. Second objection that these guys tend to bring up, science has or science can or science will explain everything, so there's no reason to look for anything supernatural. There's no reason to look for a God. Everything is atoms and physics, and we don't understand it all yet, but eventually we will. I know there are Sam Harris quotes on this. I didn't grab one. I got Stephen Hawking here for us instead, famous physicist. He says, before we understand science, it's natural to believe that God created the universe. But now, science offers a more convincing explanation. What I meant by we would know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know if there were a God, which there isn't. I'm an atheist. I like the structure of that. I really do. I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but I get a kick out of it. And what he's talking about here is the idea that, okay, at some point, perfect knowledge is possible. Everything is atoms, everything is physics, and therefore we could eventually know everything. And when we do, we'll understand everything about how everything works, and therefore we won't need to worry about a God. And the writer goes on in the article to say, Hawking now believes that an approach known as M theory will eventually reveal the grand design of the cosmos. I don't think you're supposed to say design if you don't believe in a God, but that's fine. We'll let that one go. So these guys think, okay, science hasn't explained everything, but it will, which again kind of seems like cheating. That seems like kind of a faith statement to me. It hasn't, but it will. And since it will, and we know it will, even though it hasn't, we don't have to look for anything else. But I love you. I think there are a few things. Leanna's got my back, guys. I think there are a few things that science will never explain. And I want to raise a few, and you guys can probably think of others. And just a few objections to Mr. Hawking, if I may. The first being origins. Where did all this come from? Of course, we know what the Bible says, that God created the heavens and the earth, and Jesus was there, and it took 7 days, and 6, because God rested on the seventh day, and so on and so forth. And you can believe that or not, or think it's literal or metaphorical or what have you. But what the other side, the materialist side, the atheists, the new atheists would say that, okay, everything came from nothing. The Big Bang is the common theory. We could read from a science book, or we could just do the Big Bang Theory theme song from the hit CBS show, which says, our whole universe was in a hot, dense state. Then nearly 14 billion years ago, expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall, we built the pyramids. Math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with the Big Bang. Hey, we've all heard it, right? Yeah. Can't get that one out of your head once it gets in there, but it's actually a decent summary. We got to thank the Bare Naked Ladies, which is not a thing you thought anybody would ever say in church, but the band, okay? We do. For summing this up for us. So they do it pretty well. Everything was there and everything was compacted, and there was an explosion or a detonation or a release of energy in some way, and all the atoms went everywhere, and over time, through the application of various forces of physics, planets and stars and solar systems and galaxies coalesced, and eventually, single-celled life, and then through natural selection, animals and plants and humans, and here we all are. And you can believe that. Or not, or you can make fart sounds from the peanut gallery. That's fine too. But science, though, in a time before anything that exists now existed, in a time before any of the forces that are in play now were in play, in a time where we can't possibly know anything about the conditions of anything because everything was nothing, we're going to claim that we can scientifically prove that this is what happened? Maybe. I have a hard time calling that science. Science is supposed to be observable and repeatable and falsifiable, and we just are not in a position to do that. Of course, we can't do that with seven-day creation by an almighty God either, but it works a little better if you have a supernatural creator when you're postulating that it's pure matter. Maybe, but it's going to be hard to prove it through what we would call pure science. A second thing where I think we might struggle in terms of proving everything with pure science is the issue of complexity. And the issue here is actually that science is telling us a little bit too much about the complexity of everything that we see around us. We get used to it and it looks simple, kind of like our iPhones. We actually have no idea how it works, but it works and we get used to it. Take the human body, for example. It happens that, and I had to check these numbers because they're just ridiculous, but it happens that there are 100 trillion atoms in every human cell. Trillions, right? 100 trillion atoms in every human cell. There are 37 trillion cells in a human body. So you're all sitting here with 37 trillion cells, 100 trillion atoms per cell. If you multiply those two numbers together, which you can't do on your phone, and I tried, but if you want the actual zeros, you got to go to Excel or something and get it. And there it is, and it's really big. And Leanna's son was trying to tell me how to say it last night because he's a genius, but I wasn't quite sure. So I'm going to stick with just the giant number on the screen there. That's how many atoms are in your body as you sit here today. Big number. By way of comparison, if we go with that, 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang, which you can do or not do, it's up to you. But take the 13.7 billion years times 365 days times 24 hours in a day times 60 minutes per hour times 60 seconds per minute. And what you get is that second number there, the number that starts with the 432. Also a big number. That's how many seconds there would have been since the Big Bang Theory. It's a big number. It's smaller than the first number, smaller than the number of atoms in you as you sit here today. And so if we take the number of atoms in you, follow me here, okay? I'm sorry. I know it's Sunday morning. You take the number of atoms in you, you divide them by the number of seconds since allegedly the universe began, and what you get is this final number here. About 8.6 billion, which means if I take you back to the Big Bang and I give you the Lego set of atoms that are required to build a human, you get the little pictographic instruction book too. So you know how to do it. And I say, build a human with said bucket of atoms. You have to assemble that human at a rate of 8.6 billion atoms per second to get one human by now. Now, I know that's not how humans are made, okay? I have 2 kids. I know how humans are made. But that's amazing. Like, that's crazy, the level of complexity that is in us as we sit here just giggling about how humans are made. It's incredible. And the idea that that level of complexity, like, even with the 13.7 billion years, there just isn't enough time. And that's if you have the instructions, an intelligent creator, to have it happen by random chance. You can believe that. But the science there, I mean, that's tough. That's a trip. I don't know. I would have some questions about that. Complexity. What this kind of means to me, it's just a little example of Elon Musk here, and I mostly just put him up here because I like talking about this guy. This guy, he runs like 4 companies. He runs like Solar City and Tesla and SpaceX, and he started a company to dig tunnels under Los Angeles, which sounds like a joke but isn't. He's actually doing this, and he's basically our Iron Man. If he puts on the suit and starts flying around next week, I'll only be mildly surprised because that's basically where we are at this point with Elon. I think he's an alien trying to get home, and that's why he's building rockets. But that's okay. He's advancing human civilization in the process. You know what? Go Elon. That's fantastic. But what that means is next time he launches a rocket or a satellite into the sky and it looks like we're being invaded by aliens, as it did early in the year. Did you guys see that out over the Tucson mountains? Or is that what this is? The light show out over the mountains looked like a UFO. Freaked everybody out for a minute. Next time that happens and we're all going, that's amazing. You actually just got to look at the person next to you or look at Elon himself and say, oh, that's infinitely more complex, the human body than anything that he has achieved here. Impressive, though it is. Again, go Elon. He just sent a car to Mars for no reason. Like, launched a rocket to Mars and put one of his Tesla cars in it. So now it's just going to be a car on Mars. I don't know why. I don't think anybody does except Elon, but he did. But compared to the complexity of us or of creation or of everything around us, it kind of all pales in comparison. It's amazing. And I was reading in Romans, Brie, my wife, and some of the girls have been reading in Romans. And Paul talks about this, about the idea of creation. For since the creation of the world, just his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what is made, so that they are without excuse. The idea that the mystery of the origin of life, the mystery of the complexity of life, and the mystery of life itself. This is an interesting one. The third thing I was going to talk about, the idea of life itself and where it comes from. You can take those 13 billion, no, 13, sorry, now I'm getting my numbers mixed up. Take all those atoms, right? That really big number, you put them all together, you make a human being, and somehow you have life, or you assemble a dog or an insect, and somehow you have life. None of those atoms are alive. They're just hanging out in a little bit of an electrical situation, conducting some energy there. But by and large, there's no life in an atom. And yet, you put them together, you snap them together, you get them in the right formulation. It takes a long time, as we've established. But if you do, you can't. But if you could, theoretically, you get life. Somehow, we're alive, we're here, we're awake, we're conscious. There's a spark here. And it lasts for a while. And then, if you've ever had the misfortune of interacting with a dead body, which I have a couple times in my short career as a police officer. I didn't kill them, okay? That's not why my police officer career was short. They died, people die, the police get called, you gotta come make sure there was no foul play and make sure that they're actually, you don't kick the dead body either, that's disrespectful, but you gotta make sure that they're actually dead, that nobody killed them, help the coroner, it's a thing. Point being, it's all the same atoms. They were alive, there was a spark, it's all the same atoms, it's all the same material, and yet something's gone. And we can't really get our heads around what that is or how that works. The heart stops working and the brain stops conducting electricity, and okay, all the pieces are still there, but something's different. It's meat. You're looking at, there's nothing left of the person. And I don't think we're going to get to a place, where science can really explain that. And if we are, we haven't gotten there yet. So with all due respect to Mr. Hawking and to the new atheist, a few objections to the idea that science is going to explain everything for us, and so we don't need anything beyond atoms and physics to explain this world that we live in. The third idea that I wanted to touch on briefly was just the idea that reason, facts, logic can provide a moral code for us to live by, tell us what we should and shouldn't do. And this comes up all the time. The new atheists have to address this, because the first thing somebody says when you say there's no God is, how are we going to know what's right and wrong? How are we going to know what morality should be? How are we going to know how to interact with each other and behave ourselves, and what's good and bad? And so the new atheists have to race around and come up with a formulation that allows them to still have a moral code, so we don't just all descend into anarchy, because that's not really what they're going for. And Sam talks about this in a 2010 TED Talk that he did, and he thinks he's got it figured out. He says the separation between science and human values is an illusion, and actually quite a dangerous one at this point in human history. It's often thought that there's no description of the way the world is that can tell us the way it ought to be. I think this is quite clearly untrue. Values are a certain kind of fact. They're facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. We don't have compassion for rocks because we don't think rocks can suffer. Again, he goes on. If we're more concerned about our fellow primates than for insects, which we are, it's because we think they're exposed to a greater range of happiness and suffering. This is a factual claim. This is something we could be right or wrong about. There's no version of human morality that's not, at some point, reducible to a concern about the conscious experience and its possible changes. Even if you get your values from religion, even if you think that good and evil ultimately relate to conditions after death, either to an eternity of happiness with God or an eternity of suffering in hell, you're still concerned about consciousness and its changes. So that's Sam. And he's got a basic formulation here. I've heard him talk about it a lot. I'm going to put it up on the screen just to simplify that giant block of text. And the idea is that what is moral is that which maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering in conscious beings. And Sam and the new atheists, they're very concerned about consciousness. They find consciousness to be this unique thing in this universe of otherwise dead atoms. When consciousness comes online, when there's that spark of life, they, I think very correctly, actually, but they see a tremendous amount of value in that. They say that's the only thing that matters. Sam actually has a legitimate fear that artificial intelligence will arise, that it won't have consciousness, but that it'll make us think it does, and then it'll replace us, and then there'll be no consciousness left in the universe. It'll just be a bunch of AI robots running around acting like they're people, but having no consciousness. It's kind of a funny, that's a little bit hilarious, but also really dystopian. It's interesting to see the places these guys end up. But this is kind of the formulation. Consciousness and happiness and minimizing suffering, these are the things that matter. This is the moral code. But it all kind of falls apart if you refuse to accept the central premise, which is that it actually matters whether we're conscious or not, whether it actually matters whether we're happy or sad or not, that actually has any meaning, that actually has any purpose in a world that's just made up of material, of just atoms interacting and colliding and bouncing off of each other in interesting and random ways, and giving us what would actually be the illusion of consciousness, because it's all just electrical signals and chemical interactions. Does that actually matter? And if it does, why? we might feel it does, but those thoughts and those feelings are just themselves the result of atomic interactions that are an accident and really, I don't think, have any meaning or purpose or significance. There's also the fact that the human life is very short, and history, if you believe, again, the 13.6 billion years number is very long. The 100 years that we might have, if we're lucky, is just we're there and gone. It's like a lighter, and that's us, in the grand scheme of history. If this is all that there is to consciousness, if this is all there is to existence, is the 100 years that we get in this life, then how significant can that really be? And Sam will actually stipulate this. If you say, well, why does it matter if somebody's happy or somebody's sad? Why does it matter if somebody suffers or if somebody is happy? He'll say, well, listen, we all agree on that. Every person who's ever lived agrees on that, and so we just have to accept that. And if you don't accept that, then it's a non-starter. We can't even have a conversation. And that's okay, fair. That's kind of actually true. But why? Why do we have to accept that? Why would we accept that? And I think, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a cop-out. It's a way to stave off the impending doom of nothing mattering, which I guess is the alternative if you don't want to believe in God, but don't believe this either. Just gonna check here a minute. So if we look at what the Bible says, it talks about the idea that we do all have this instinct that, what matters is our consciousness. What matters is what we would call a soul. It does matter what people experience, what conscious beings experience. And the Bible would say, okay, well, that's because that's the only thing that lasts. That's the only thing that's eternal. That's the only thing that's still going to matter when all of this is dead and gone. Excuse me. So, go back to Romans. Paul says, what is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. So Sam takes this idea that we have this innate instinct towards maximizing happiness, minimizing suffering. He takes that to mean that because he doesn't believe in anything else, that's a product of us, of our own matter and our own makeup and our own consciousness, and therefore that's morality and we don't need God. But I think it's just as reasonable to say what Paul says, which is that that's something God put within us. That's something that transcends this life, this instinct that some part of this is going to go on when all of this is done, is something that God actually put within us. It's at least a plausible counter-argument that I think makes sense. Sam is kind of just redefining morality as whatever we all happen to care about. That's morality, and we should just go with that. And if we had perfect information and we knew everything about everything, then we could build a world that would maximize happiness for the most people the most of the time, and that would be morality. But I think that's actually kind of dangerous. I think that tends toward, especially since we're never going to have perfect information, tends toward a situation of, a couple different extremes. Tribalism, where we only care about maximizing happiness for the people that we actually know and care about, and whatever happens to everybody else or needs to happen to everybody else, okay, I'm going to maximize the happiness for myself or my group. Utilitarianism on the other side, where, okay, if I can maximize the happiness of the most people, then if I have to hurt some people or make them suffer or impoverish them or enslave them to do it, then okay, I can do that because I'm maximizing the happiness for the most people. Again, absent perfect information, this can all get very dangerous, and I don't think we're ever going to have perfect information. We're never going to be omniscient. So I think there are some dangers there that these guys might encounter if they ever get their way. We talked about this a little bit in our groups, our midweek groups during the week. I'm sorry, just a minute. Whew. Throat's getting real scratchy. I told my group I was going to plagiarize this, but it turns out if you cite your sources, it's not plagiarism. So Andy Stanley was talking about Solomon and what he wrote in Ecclesiastes, and how everything under the sun, everything that exists as part of this life and this world, is meaningless because it all dies, it all goes away, it all stops mattering after we pass away. But he says, he, meaning God, has also set eternity in the human heart. So this idea that we're going to transcend this, that we're going to go on, that our consciousness actually matters because it's the only thing that lasts, is something that God has put inside us. So I thought that was cool, and I thought it tied in well to what I was already planning on talking about today. So to look back at the objections here that we've covered, if God existed, we'd know. Well, maybe, or maybe it's not in God's interest to smack us over the head with it every day. God's thoughts could be different than our thoughts. Not necessarily a proof. Science can explain everything. Well, it hasn't yet, and it seems that there are going to be some challenges to it ever doing that. Reason can provide morality. Well, reason can tell us what we care about and how to get more of it, but it doesn't really say anything about whether what we care about is right or wrong or matters or why. So those are just some arguments that I thought were interesting. I wanted to share them with you guys. Again, there are whole books written about probably each of these topics. You can go read them if you want to. But I wanted to touch on this, and I wanted to touch back to why it matters, beyond just giving me kind of a fun excuse to nerd out with you guys this morning, which, don't get me wrong, I always appreciate. But what's the point? Why does this matter? Why are we talking about this today? And I want to draw it back to, oddly enough, what Andy Stanley said over the last 5 weeks. What does love require of us? And I'm going to say, in a certain way, that love requires preparation. I got a chance to teach a long time ago, a few years back, about kind of the afterlife, same idea, that our consciousness is going to transcend this, and it's going to go on, and it's going to go somewhere, and we're being offered an opportunity to have that be somewhere great. God is offering us a rescue or a bailout, and I use the analogy of a rescue of a rope ladder coming down of a helicopter. It's going to save somebody, and the idea that we ought to reach up and we ought to grab on, and that then once we're there, we ought to be reaching back down and seeing who else we can help up onto the ladder, help up off the rooftops as the floodwaters rise as well. That should become our mission or our purpose. And I want to expand on that a little bit today. The idea that you would go out as part of the rescue team in the helicopter, and you would arrive and you would find someone in trouble, and you would want to help, but you didn't bring any rope, or you didn't get any paramedic training, or you don't know CPR, or you're out of shape and can't help the person up onto the ladder, or you're deficient in any number of ways because you haven't actually prepared for this moment. So you find yourself in a position where somebody needs help, somebody needs a hand, somebody needs rescuing, somebody needs some of this information that we've talked about today, but we don't have it because we haven't prepared ourselves. And Paul talks about, you study to show yourself approved of God, and being a workman who doesn't have to be ashamed, and handling accurately the word of truth. And that means the Bible, but it also means understanding what the counter-arguments are, what the counter-positions are. It doesn't mean that you have to, go read a bunch of atheist books. It doesn't mean you have to read everything C.S. Lewis ever wrote about defending Christianity either. I mean, there are worse things you could do with your time, certainly, but you don't have to. But it does mean that if you're sitting here today and you're like, I've never heard any of this before, and I have no idea how to answer any of it, and the answers only halfway make sense, that part could be my fault. But, and I would be totally dumbfounded if my cousin or my coworker or my classmate, I tried to talk to them about God, and they said, well, what about this? And I would be completely lost. Well, I mean, that's okay today, but it might be a good idea to think about whether that's where we want to stay or not, or whether we want to get to a place where we're a little bit better equipped or not. And I know this is not everybody's thing, and I know that not everybody is going to embrace it to the same degree, but just knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and knowing where to find the answers is a great first step. So I want to challenge us there to look into that a little bit if we are somebody who's committed ourselves to God, but we haven't looked into finding those answers. I want to encourage us as a church to do a little bit of that. Of course, if you're in a place where you haven't come to that definitive point yet, you haven't decided that you want to follow God with your life, again, thrilled that you're here today. I think we might have lost a couple people during this talk. I'm not sure if that was me again, or I don't know. But I'm so glad that you're here. If you're here and would love to talk to you more about this kind of stuff, if you're interested in God, if you're interested in starting a relationship with God, I would love to talk to you about that. I got a chance to baptize a friend last weekend, and that was great. We see that in the Bible when somebody decides to make a commitment to God, that's what we're to do, and we got to do that, and it was fantastic, and I would love to help you out with that, as would anybody here at the church. So think about that. There's a couple things in the handout to take a look at, just to remind us of what we talked about today. You guys can do that, and we'll pray and get out of here. Dear God, thanks so much just for everybody who's here today. Thanks for the chance to dig into some interesting stuff today. Hope it was interesting. Confront just some of the realities of what are out there in the world, some of the arguments that are being made, some of the positions that are being taken, that people that we love and that we care about might be exposed to, might be interested in, might think make some sense. pray that this will motivate us to have a better understanding of you, what you say about who you are, and what you do and what you want from us. A little bit better understanding of some of the arguments, some of the challenges, really some of the deceptions that are out there. Help that to motivate us to want to be, good workmen, good scholars, to learn the things that we need to know to help the people that we want to help, and to stay humble, stay wise throughout that process, know when it's time to speak and time to listen, and just help us all to have that kind of wisdom, that kind of discernment, and be able to take some good actions for you this week. Thanks so much just for everybody who's here, for everything that you do for us, and please keep everybody safe this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.